Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Anatomy of a Rumor. My guest today is Mr. Ben Lee Ralph. I hope I pronounced that right. I forgot to ask how to pronounce that before the episode.
Just jumped in, took a stab. It's pretty close.
Just realized it was a tricky one. So Ben is going to introduce himself, but just to give you guys a little bit of a prefix about what Ben does is Ben has been a consultant. Ben has had a very diverse background. From I saw on his LinkedIn profile, he's been in consulting, he's been in product management and UX, and currently probably working on automation and system design. So without further ado, Mr. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Ben, how do you relate to today's topic of system design and automation? Could you give us a bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I've always, my background is that I like to start businesses. That's kind of been a bit of a trait all the way through. It's just like, I reckon I could turn this into a business. And some have been successful, some have been not so successful. Luckily, the non-successful ones were the ones closer to the start, and the more successful ones have been closer towards the end. But I think the thing I've always really been interested in is firstly, technology, using technology, finding out how it works, getting in under the hood. So that's very much been an interest. And I had an advertising background at university, which I kind of dropped a lot of the traditional advertising subjects and got drawn into the psychology of why people do the things that they do, or why do people behave the way they do. And so I guess I've always really found that when you're talking about how people use technology, how people run businesses, that all really comes down to the systems that people use. You know, there's the formal processes and systems that people maybe think about and roll their eyes about, it's the boring process that I never follow. But there is also, I guess, a meta level on top of that, which is the actual how people work together. And so a little bit maybe of a rambly explanation of my background and how I've come here. But yeah, certainly an interesting in systems, psychology, and then how that interacts with automation.
So give us an understanding of what are you working on currently?
Yeah, so at the moment, I've just launched a company, actually. We're about 6 months in to it's a company called Impact Positive. And we're a collaboration platform for hybrid and remote teams. And I think the way I can summarize our promise is do more while not working quite so hard, or stress less and achieve more. That's really what we're helping people to do. And you can think about us maybe as an anti-project management tool.
Right.
So often when I've worked with, I mentioned I was a consultant, and you work with these big teams. And if you're trying to do anything, especially in the marketing space, there's what are you trying to do? There's the how you're going to do it. And then there's the who's going to do what and when. And the project management tools really focus on the who's doing what and when element. And then they completely gloss over the what are you trying to achieve and how are you going to do it? Which often means that people are optimizing for making sure everyone's really busy, making sure that every minute of every day is allocated to a task or a meeting. Whereas our platform is focused on, well, what are you actually trying to achieve? And then, frankly, how can we minimize the amount of things that you need to do to be able to achieve that, which obviously lends itself to automation. So, yeah, that's what I'm working on. We're in the phase now where we've recently just launched to market. We've had, a few people kind of use it, beta test it, find the bugs, and we're, I guess, about to ramp up the launch now.
Very interesting. So, but the challenge that probably arises, and I'm sure it has gone through your mind as well in such a business, is that the utility of the tool is such that it's very broad. Many people can use it. So as a founder, you've probably had this debate in your head. Who am I narrowing this for? Who is this tool for? Have you been able to figure that out yet, or are you still in the figuring out process for that?
Yeah, we definitely have. Look, what you've just mentioned there is a trap that I've fallen into every time I've tried to do everything. It's this kind of ice, and it's just this thing could be really big. But no, look, our explicit market is purpose-driven organizations, and I guess in particular non-for-profits and social enterprises.
Okay.
And I think in particular we focus there because, one, I've had experience working with them in my previous consultancy days, but also that is the real center of a bunch of people who are trying to achieve something that's quite important to them. Like, they're very passionate about it, and they're certainly ripe for updating their ways of working and using technology in a better way. It's a bit of a traditional industry, I guess. So yeah, that's our target market.
Yeah, we dropped on for a little while. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so yeah, cool. Okay, I think we get an understanding of the solution, and I think it was. Did you start off with the idea of being for social impact driven organizations, because the name pretty much suggests you had that in mind, impact positive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've always wanted to work, I guess we've always really wanted to help organizations be impact positive. So it's the name of the business. It's a large part of our mission is helping people really create sustainable businesses. But the narrowing down to, like, let's start where this is a pretty critical point. So NFP, social enterprises. It made sense as like a really good place to start. But I think our dream would be to, every organization really should be, a sustainable, ethical business.
Certainly. And there is a lot of scrutiny, even from an official standpoint, towards that, like with the ESG and CSR policies being enforced pretty much now. So definitely a very interesting space to be in right now. So from your personal experience, coming from a consulting background, what did you feel like? I mean, being a consultant, you advise businesses, but you don't have skin in the game, right? Yeah. And it's a clearer picture. I do consulting as well, right? I think it's easier to see when you're looking from the outside. Coming from a consulting, starting your own business, did that really help you, or pretty much it was a completely different ball game doing your own business?
It is a completely different ballgame. So yeah, like, we experienced it. So, like, we're starting a consultancy, like, we're running a consultancy. It's a small 3-person team to start off with. And you're going out into these organizations. And so you step into their meeting room. This is before COVID. And you're like channeling, like, you're being an expert, and you're like, this is what you should do, confidence, it's this, it's that. And then you go back into your shop and it's like disarray.
Interesting. Ben, let's get into the automation and system side of things. I think the first thing that I might want to start with is, I know you're focused with the tool, particularly on the not-for-profit and impact-driven side, but as a general rule for businesses, what do you believe is a good point to start thinking about automation and systems and processes? Because as a startup, it's very agile, it's very scrappy, you're doing everything yourself. Sometimes you even have a team and still there's no processes, you're just getting shit done, right? What is a good point to start thinking about, okay, let's start thinking about designing some processes and documenting and automating this stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think my mind always jumps to, like, or I think this is true for a lot of people, they jump straight to, like, how can I use automation and AI? Which is, you can't really implement that stuff in a way that's going to be effective unless you've done step one, which is develop a base of systems. That's kind of the first thing you need to do, is kind of understand how it is that your business runs before injecting technology into it. And so I think as early as possible is probably the answer to your question, but don't try and over systematize things too early. So if you're a team of, one person, or maybe you're a team of like 2 or 3 people, having your rough systems just in like a Google Doc. And maybe you've just mapped out, I would generally say something like, your money comes in, your money goes out. And so there's the money in marketing, sales stuff. There's your operations, legal, payroll. Like those two things you probably want to have some pretty solid systems around. And then there's your product delivery. And so probably from that 1 to 5 people, it's informal, but having something written down is great. And then as you go from 5 to 10, you're probably going to want to start to capture that stuff in a tool. And then from 10 anywhere up, really, you just need to have systems. Otherwise, people are just going to start growing the business in several different directions, or you're going to start building silos.
Interesting. So basically, I mean, yeah, it's a no-brainer to have things documented and systematized as soon as possible. But obviously you can't do all things at one time. So what I'm getting from your answer is that you should probably look at financing as the first thing, and the cash flow issues as the first thing that you document and systematize and automate, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much makes sense. I don't want to be sending invoices all day when I've got tons of other things to do. So let's say we've done the finance and stuff, and we're a startup. We've done the finance, we've automated the finance, and we've systematized. What's the next most logical department or the sector of the business that you should be looking at systematizing and automating?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the business a little bit, but I suspect it's either going to be sales and marketing, or it's going to be service delivery. And I think for most businesses, or most different types of businesses, if you're relying on an income stream to support what you're doing, then starting to turn that into something that's a lot more predictable is where I would start, for sure.
Mm-hmm. But you say we should automate sales and marketing. I think we can probably automate sales to some extent, but at the very early phase, when you automate your marketing, there's a certain loss of qualitative feedback, which is very crucial to a business, especially in its early phase. And automation tends to take out the qualitative feedback. When you automate something, you lose that direct human connection and that qualitative feedback. So how do you overcome that problem in that case?
Yeah, great point. No, I totally agree with you there. I think people generally try and automate the wrong thing, or they exactly what, like you said there, right? Like say it's social media marketing, right? The first thing that's the most obvious to automate is the posting of content, right? Like that just seems like an obvious thing. And I agree, like that isn't necessarily where I'd start at all, because posting to social media early days is actually much more about interacting with the people and your posts and understanding that. Like that's a really human thing. The things that I'd automate first is gathering data. Like the kinds of organizations that I've seen, they create some great content, they post it out, and then you're like, great, so how did that do? And the taking the data and then getting that into a dashboard, and then having that dashboard send you some insights so you can track stuff, just like goes over their head right away. And they're like, look, actually that's the stuff that we haven't figured out yet. And like that's I feel like a no-brainer for automation. So you're actually getting those insights through, not necessarily like the creation of content.
Interesting. And then probably monitor the feedback that comes from posting that content in a more qualitative manner, instead of just automating the post and forgetting about what happens to it afterwards. I mean, I was listening to a podcast this afternoon, and it was a very interesting thing they said. They said like a lot of us automate our social media posting, right? And then what happens is a ton of people become aware of your content, and then they respond to the content. Let's say you're selling pizzas and someone comes and comments on your post, says, is this gluten-free? Right? So what does that comment tell you? That comment tells you that person is really further down in the sales funnel. He's almost ready to buy. He's considering purchasing. And then what happens is, because you've got automation on the posting, so no one's doing the community management qualitatively, what happens is no one responds to them, and then they don't end up being a customer. They say it makes so much sense that when you do it on social media, it feels okay, but imagine if that was a real world shop, because that's what your social media and your website is. If it was your real world shop and a customer came in and asked you a question, would you not respond to them? Of course you would, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you hit it right in the head, that automation should be used very smartly and strategically, and the feedback loops should remain open even if you're doing automation.
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me is, one, people generally, or sometimes, well, they often automate the wrong things, like they automate the social media posting, like we've said, or they have this idea that once you automate something, you don't have to think about it at all, or it's just a set and forget. And actually, really, I think the goal with, say, either whether it be systems or automation, is that it should be doing the heavy lifting of the work, right? Like they can do some of the bulk of the work, which should be freeing you up to do more of the interpersonal connection with people, right? Like I think if, to take your shop analogy, I've certainly walked into shops before, right? And the person is so stressed out because they're on the computer typing away, or the line's out the door, and they're not actually giving you any personal service. What you want to do is try and make sure that person's kind of just sitting there ready to have that like really good interaction. I think that's what good automation looks like, not this.
Absolutely. And I think exactly, and this was the thought that was going in my head, and you exactly said that. So what I was thinking is that automation should be used to achieve efficiency, not to drive strategy.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people miss. They think they'll buy a piece of technology to automate something and their business will become 10 times better. No.
Yeah.
It'll make your life easier on a day-to-day basis. It won't drastically change anything else.
100%. And do you know, like the biggest killer here, and I don't know if you're on TikTok. I suspect probably.
I am.
Even from a professional perspective, you are. Which is, there's this whole theme of these like set and forget businesses. That's this idea that like, I'll set this thing up and I'll get passive income, and then I'll never have to think about it again. And I don't know, maybe someone's been successful at doing that, but mostly that just seems like a scam. But I think that's what people have in their head when they think about automation, right? I'll set it up and I'll be a millionaire and I'll never have to do anything, you know. And I don't think that's the case.
Human beings have been trying to get shortcuts from the day one, man. I mean, and no one's ever gotten to that place, and we still don't learn the lessons.
Yeah, completely.
But yeah, the key takeaway is that you need to be very thoughtful about automating stuff. You need to be careful about what you're automating, because you don't want to be automating actual roles that are which require people and human emotions and qualitative feedback.
Yeah. Can I give you another? I'll give you another quick example. If that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen these like copywriting AI tools that are out there?
Yes, sir.
So I think that's a good example of, if you go in and use one of those tools with the thought process of, I'm going to type in a few sentences and then that's going to generate me a post, and then I'm going to put it out and that's going to do anything. That's, I think, at least in my experience, incorrect. But what those tools can do really well is, if you're waking up in the morning, you've got a little bit of a creative block, or you're not sure what you're going to say, playing around for 5 minutes in that tool to spark some creativity and then kind of interact, you can end up crafting something really great. And like, that's a good use of an AI tool, not just shooting out all of this stuff into Google that Google's going to go, yeah, what wrote that?
But here's another thing, though. I even though we're talking about that, and I completely agree with that, but I think if I look at it from another perspective, where let's say I become pro automation for a little while, that everything should be automated and the world should be automated, there is a case to be made for that as well, from technologies like DALL-E. Currently, like, I mean, the kind of art that they're producing, man, I mean, that's some next level shit. I don't know if you've seen those pictures.
Yeah.
So awesome, man. And I mean, probably 5 years down the road, probably, who knows, maybe they can do everything as good as a human, maybe better.
Yeah. Well, the thing that excites me about that is that they will do, I have no doubt that they'll make images and videos as great as humans do right now. But we don't stay static. Like, we get to use those tools. And what excites me is that as computers and technology gets better, then we've just got better tools to make more interesting art, more creative uses of those things. And so I think that's exciting. And I could be wrong about this, but I suspect that in 20 years from now, we're not just going to be looking at art made by robots and humans are just sitting back, not involved in that.
You think we'll still have a role to play in that?
I reckon we will, yeah.
Oh, that's gonna be interesting, man. I don't know. I've seen some shit from Dolly. I mean, I'm very impressed.
It is very good.
Definitely much better than what I can paint. So I mean, I don't know. At least they won't be needing me. I don't know about other human beings, but they won't be needing me to produce art. I mean, yeah. So we've talked about automation, and we've talked about, I mean, being smart about automating the right things and not automating too much. And when we say not to automate too much, we've talked on a high level that qualitatively you shouldn't be automating something like. But let's speak practically in terms of a department or a function or an operation thing that you should not automate. Very tactically speaking, what would you not automate?
Oh yeah, what are you not going to automate? It's a good question. I think you really touched on it before, which is you can't automate away the human connection that you have with your customers. And there's certainly ways that you can use technology to improve the customer experience. Like there are certainly ways that technology can make that better. But I think if your goal was to try and fully automate the interaction that you're going to have with people, even if it's just from how you can learn from them or make the service better, like that just feels like a game of diminishing returns.
I think one thing that I, as a business owner, wouldn't automate, because as we're talking about this, and I'm thinking, I was gonna say places where a customer needs support, but then I think I would much rather talk to the Vodafone billing machine rather than talking to Vivek from Delhi. But then I'm thinking, okay, so basically we shouldn't be automating things where the customer actually wants to speak to a human.
Yeah, and look, to be honest, if I was to have another crack at this question, if I was to rewind, I actually think what you need to do is figure out what is special about your business. Like, what is the magic that happens? And use technology to help boost that however you want it, right? Like, it's not a question of technology or no technology, but whatever it is that's special about what you do, keep that. And then find the things that aren't necessarily core to what you're trying to achieve. And then automate those things so they happen and that they're at a high quality. So like in your example where like your Vodafone, what makes them core, I suspect, isn't their approach to customer service. And maybe what they should do is use technology to make it as seamless as possible. And then call it. But if you're a different kind of business, right, you're running a local bakery, which is kind of all about your connection with community, then yeah, that's the bit that makes you special.
Exactly.
Automate something else.
Absolutely. Let's take automation into marketing. And first of all, tell me, is there any marketing automation on a tactical level in the tool as well, in your tool? Or
no,
is it
we don't
more
do
so
any
from the SOP standpoint?
Yeah, so we don't have kind of direct automations coming out of the tool, especially in the marketing side. It's all about capturing the systems or the standard operating procedures that then can kind of interact with automation.
Okay, so it's a very high-level operational kind of automation that we're talking about over there.
Yeah,
but when you talk about marketing and automation in marketing, what are your thoughts? A typical automation used in marketing is probably the lead nurture sequences. After capturing an email address or something. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of that?
I think when it's done well, I think you can do it well and it's very effective, and I think you can do it poorly and you're going to get the results of something that's pretty poor. I think when we're talking about those email sequences, I think what is really good about those is as a company starting to scale, and there is 1,000 different things going on. If you didn't have those automations set up, you wouldn't be onboarding your customers. Like, their emails wouldn't be sent out. That was a thing that would just get dropped and it wouldn't happen. And so I think being able to have those set up for a consistency and an onboarding and kind of keeping that at the top of people's minds is, like a very valuable way of using automation. Especially once you've found your product market fit, like once you know what works and you can start A/B testing sequences to kind of in that refinement stage, I think it's quite valuable there. But I think my pet peeve is when you see some of those systems and they come from a no reply email address. Like, I find that just so mind blowing that you've got a customer, they want to talk to you, and you're like, nah, mate.
Listen to what it turns into a lecture or a speech instead of a conversation. Like, you're clear, your subject is don't reply to this. Interesting. So do you have do you recall a time where you came across some really good automation sequence from a company that you interacted with? Do you recall a good interaction or experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the organizations we worked with was Oxfam, and they had launched a new app a few months ago, and it's called something like if this, then it'll come to me in a second. I'll send it through to you. But basically, the whole premise of the app was you could go into the app and you could register to support things before they happened. So that way money could be deployed very quickly. So you could go in and say, if there's an earthquake or a bushfire or like whatever that natural disaster is, I can pre-register to kind of support that before it happens. And so there was like a direct response nature of it. And then there was also an element of it where it was a little bit more sassy. So like every day, the average temperature went above the kind of safe threshold for global warming. You could choose to opt in and donate a few dollars there. And the thing that I liked about their campaign or their like nurture sequence is because they had that little bit of information about what you'd gone in and supported, they could then take that and then send you a customized sequence that was more informative than anything else. You know, it was like giving you information about what are the causes of bushfires in this area, what could you do to prep, what are causes that you could give to before that. And I felt that was quite a good use of that. And I think the other thing they did at the end, which I really liked, was that they gave you an additional, like they'd matched your donation with an extra $10 to get you back in the app. And I thought that was clever in that often the use case is you go in, you use the app, you forget about it. And at the end of their sequence, they actually got you back in through a loop again. And I found that was quite clever.
Wow. That's a brilliant mix of automation and personalization. I think a lot of people talk about embedding personalization into automation, but not a lot of people can actually achieve that. I mean, you could see from a mile away that they're using a generic token to do that personalization, but that's like a really good example of personalization. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, please.
Oh, all I was going to say is personalization is an interesting one in that the thing that was nice is that I felt like they were personalizing on something that wasn't necessarily that creepy. Like I'd given them a direct signal that I like this thing, and then they sent me information on that. They weren't like, because you're 35 male living in this area, we're gonna like, which gets a bit weird.
Exactly. Or it wasn't like, because you ordered a skim flat white this morning. Interesting. So talk to us about automation and system design thinking in a larger business versus a smaller business. So you probably work across both the scales, and what's the key difference in your approach when you go about both of them? Yeah,
absolutely. I think so. We've worked with like very big companies and very small companies, and I would almost go on the limb to say that their problems are the same. What happens with scale is that the issue gets worse because you've got more people. And so I would say that the common issue between them all is you've got to be pretty focused on what you're actually trying to achieve. It's like job one as a business. And so if you're one person, one person can have no focus and go in 1,000 different directions and that'll fail. But it's easier for one person to be aligned and focused than it is, say, 50 people to be aligned and focused. The second one is, how is it that we're actually going to do the thing that we do? Like what is that system? And I think this is like something that people don't spend a lot of time doing. It kind of feels like a waste of time or like eating your vegetables, to actually sit down and say, well, what's the process that we're going to follow here? Because everyone kind of just assumes that they know, or they kind of like to make it up as they go along. But just the small act of, before you do something, taking a few moments to go, oh, I'm gonna do this, then I'm gonna do this, then I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna expect this result at the end. And even if you go through that and you don't do any of those things, you'll be much more efficient, you'll be much more productive than if you just kind of go in blind and didn't take that moment to be a bit mindful about how you're gonna approach a particular task. And so if you're an individual or a small group of people, often because you just feel like there's so much going on, it's easy to be like, I'm just not going to take the time to do that. But in my experience, generally taking that small amount of time does have a really good effect. And then as you get to a bigger organization, like as you start to then scale up to 20 or 30 people, not having shared processes between areas just means that people stop talking to each other, or work just happens in little small silos, and it becomes more and more confrontational to be able to pass work from one place to the next.
Very true, very true. And and that leads perfectly into my next question, is that once you have those processes and systems in place, how do you go on about figuring out the loopholes or the bad pieces of that process, and how do you figure out how to further optimize that process from an efficiency standpoint within the org and from a UX standpoint, where the customer gets a good experience as well? How do you optimize those processes that you built in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first step in being able to improve a process is firstly writing it down. And it seems like a very, very simple first step. But often people get to the end of a system that they've run, and then they said, well, how could we have improved this? But because they haven't got a good record of what they did, it becomes a little bit like, it can be a good place for conflict to arise, because it can be a little bit blamey, right? Like, oh, this didn't work because you didn't do this, or this didn't happen, or whatever, right? Whereas if you've said, here's what we were going to do, and then you're like, well, this bit here didn't work, outside of blame. Great, well, we can optimize that bit there. So I think once you've got the system jotted down, and it doesn't need to be over-engineered, it could literally just be in like a Word doc or whatever tool that you use, then specifying it like an hour, and to have an after-action review. So if it's the end of a marketing campaign, I've done this with many organizations, just, great, what went right, what went wrong, what will we change next time? People just it's the most liberating experience. People have just got Post-it notes and they're just going to town. It's a very creative endeavor. And then the trick that very few people then do is actually action that next time. It's very common for all of that to just get saved. Everyone feel like it's been cathartic, and then it doesn't get implemented next time around.
So basically create an environment where you can actually talk about the processes in place, and where you can talk about organizational restructuring and get that feedback from the people who are in those processes day in and day out, and then actually go out and action on these. That's a very helpful tip, definitely. And it seems like a subtle thing, but very easy to miss, definitely. You might have just answered it in that last one, but I'm still going to go on and ask it. What do you see is one of the biggest myths from an automation standpoint in companies right now? What's the biggest mistake they make when they think about automation?
That's a good question. I think my inclination is, okay, look, I think where it really impacts businesses the worst is when it ties the hands of people within the organization to do the thing that they know is right, as opposed to what the technology is telling them to do. So this can happen in many different areas of the business, but I think it's most visible to customers when you call up a call center and you've got a very, what seems to you reasonable request. We were trying to, my wife and I were going to travel overseas. We'd recently got married. We changed our last names. So I went from having quite a simple last name to a slightly more complex last name. And all we wanted to do was change the name on the ticket. And the person on the end of on the phone was like very lovely, like they were on my side, but the computer just wouldn't accept the change unless they went through this series of steps. They had to unbook it from Qantas and then rebook it on this other flight. And I think that's where automation is like a real hindrance, because then you've got people who know what needs to happen working against technology, and that's just frustrating for everyone involved.
Very, very true. Very true. Let's talk about process and take the automation side out of it. Process designing is in itself a very challenging thing, and I see the biggest miss when it comes to creating processes inside, or SOPs inside your organization, is that organizations or the leaders tend to get very tunnel visioned, and they think from the perspective of organizational efficiency, and they forget the UX part in that. A great example would be the demand waterfall model in the SaaS structure. I don't know if you're familiar with that, like SDR to AE to the demo, and then you got through 7 stages. Whereas that's great if you have someone unqualified coming in and you need to qualify them and get there. But if you're selling to finance leaders and you've got a firmographic fit CFO coming in requesting a demo, they're ready to buy. They've got the money. They like, but you still make them go through that process, which is not very customer centric. And how do you suggest companies to gain that optimal balance between the user experience and organizational efficiency?
Yeah, great. This is such a common problem. Super frustrating. I'm with you, and I think it's actually like quite a foundational element of the impact positive, the system we used, which is that when people create processes, they think about steps, right? They're thinking about this step to this step to this step, or in your example, it's like person comes in and like they're a lead, then they become this, then they become qualified, and yada, 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 yada. The steps actually aren't important, right? The steps are at best, it's a best guess of like how things might happen, but the world's complex and dynamic. So when we're actually thinking about systems, what I think is most important is, first of all, like, what's the purpose of the system? Like, what is it trying to do, and how do you measure that? So if you've got say an onboarding funnel, right? Like someone's paid and they're going to start using the system. The purpose isn't that they use this screen and then this feature and then this screen. The purpose is that, or the thing that you're measuring is, are they getting value? Are they coming back? And how can we kind of help that loop? So in terms of the system, it's what are you trying to do? What are you measuring? What is like your definition of done for that, right? So it's all of that stuff that kind of sits around and kind of gives you a sense of the organization. It gives you a little bit of a framework to play in, right? And once you've got those things, having some steps can be helpful, right? 80% of the time, we follow this checklist process. But that's not important. If you can help support a customer through onboarding by not following those, then don't follow those. And so I think that would be how I'd approach system design, which is steps last.
Excellent. So you're building a SaaS business. I think we've discussed processes and automation, and I think we've got a set narrative on that, a clear perspective on that. I want to talk to Ben, the entrepreneur. Building a SaaS business, building multiple businesses, particularly in SaaS right now, I would say, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing in building a SaaS, and how are you trying to overcome it?
Yeah, so biggest challenge for me actually is probably something that you're an expert in, so I'll have to default to you on all topics like this. But generally speaking, when I've had businesses in the past, they've been a lot more B2B and a lot more relationship based. And so what you're doing is an amount of, I guess, marketing, which is highly valuable, right? Like it's getting people to be like, that person is an expert in their field. This is someone that we should pay attention to. They come in and then you build a relationship. It's a little bit more sales-based maybe. Like you build a relationship, you listen to their problem, you give them a solution, and then you kind of build or foster that over time. Whereas in SaaS, which is a new world for me in terms of running it myself, as opposed to just telling other people how to do it. It's a little bit more impersonal, right? Like you're going to start doing those things at scale, and finding the way of being able to do that in a personal way is our biggest challenge right now.
Right, interesting. So are you a product-led business? Is there a freemium free trial kind of model, or
product-led business? In fact, because we've just launched, a few months ago, we're completely free. Like if anyone's watching and they want to jump on, it's like free forever. All we ask is for your most candid feedback.
Oh wow, folks! If you're listening to this, jump on it.
Now's the time for sure.
Very interesting. So, I think you're talking to that myth. There's a myth around the fact that if product-led sells itself. Are you finding that to be true? Because I don't think that's true.
No, I totally. I think you've got to. I strongly believe that you've got to have a good You've got to have a good product. Trying to sell a product that's not good. I mean, it's very possible and probably quite profitable, but it's certainly more difficult than it sounds. But I don't think having a good product is enough.
Exactly.
It's certainly not enough.
Exactly. And even if you create a flywheel or a model like product-led growth, it's not, again, going back to the point of automation, there's no such thing as automation. You got to put in the grind first to automate that later. And it's the same for a product-led growth business. You got to put in the initial grind, the sales and marketing efforts behind it, and then the wheels start turning automatically. And that as those promoters, as your NPS scores increases, the word of mouth drives it.
Yeah.
So interesting, man. Interesting. I want to get into the rapid fire round with you. Talk to the personal side of Ben. A movie or season that you're watching currently?
Ooh. Look, I've got to admit, we've just watched The Office for like the fifth time. Is kind of like I don't know, guilty pleasure watch. It's just very easy to watch in the background. What am I watching that's good though? There's a new season of Love Life on Stan. I think that the basic premise is that you'll have like 7 meaningful connections or relationships in your life before you meet the one. So that's a nice watch.
Is that like a season or is that like a reality show?
No. It's a season of it's a drama.
Interesting. And with that Office, man, it's something about those older dramas. I mean, you keep going, like my thing with that is me and my partner, we always go back to Friends. Like I've watched it probably 2 times now, and my partner's probably gone through it like 6 or 7 times. I'm like, get a life. There's so much content out there. Why do we keep going back to this?
It's like the Netflix budget for new shows is like in the billions, and it's still like the comfort food of The Office.
I think it's just something to do with psychology. The familiar, something that's familiar, it's easier to go back to it, gravitate to it. Interesting. Yeah. So a podcast you listen to?
Podcast I listen to. I really like Pivot. I find myself coming back to that all the time.
Pivot.
You heard of Pivot?
Prof G?
Yeah, it's the Prof G guy, but also with I forget his co-host's name. I'm terrible at names.
I think he's the star of the show, though. What's his real? Scott Galloway.
Galloway, that's right.
Galloway.
Yes. Yeah. And Kara Swisher is the other, probably more famous than him, really.
Yeah.
But they've got a really good dynamic, and I think they really. The thing I like about it is that they walk the line of like having bold opinions without being like not just having bold opinions for the sake of having bold opinions, right? Like they say things that they think, and then someone, between episodes, Scott might say something relatively controversial. Someone will come back and he'll actually admit that he was wrong, and then not be deterred and have like another controversial opinion. And I
think that's the reason why Scott is famous, to be making bold controversial claims, and then probably most of them failing, and then he being open to it. I think that's what he's famous for.
Yeah.
All right, man. What's your favorite food?
Ooh. I mean, more recency bias than anything else. But I went out for the pub last night because down here in Melbourne, at least, the weather's nice between two periods of rain. A bit of a Sunday session on a Monday, and I had the nicest roast chicken, crispy skin, tender inside, chips, gravy.
Nothing beats pub food, right? Nothing beats it. Like, yeah, there's something about these classics and local places, right? I'm from Pakistan, so there's a big culture of we call them the driver hotels, right? They're not really hotels; they're restaurants, and they're like the kind of things you see in old Indian movies. There's a village kind of road, a highway going through a village, and there's this weird looking restaurant, and they don't even have chairs. They've got like those big beds made out of weird ropes, right? But the food there, man, I mean, I would choose that hotel over a 5-star hotel. I mean, I'm assuming local pubs are the same thing in Australia. In a first world country, a pub is the equivalent of a driver restaurant over there. Something about these foods, man. Nothing beats them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's that, like another good example of that, I think, is my wife, Jacinta. Her dad is Vietnamese, and so she's half Vietnamese. And so you go and have like Vietnamese street food. But like, I guess it's these meals where you go in and it's like quite quick, very easy, but like very comforting, very flavorful. Yeah,
exactly. Are you originally an Australian?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You've got that British persona.
My wife gives me a lot of crap for having a Melbourne accent. So,
well, that's pretty much a Kiwi accent, a Melbourne accent, isn't it? Very, very close to that.
Yeah, that's right. Can't say the word lettuce.
Lettuce.
Or celery, I can't say.
Your favorite book?
Favorite non-fiction book is, I just finished reading Traction for like the second time. And there's something very no frills about running a business that I appreciate. There's growing up in like the tech startup industry or working in tech. Often every story you hear is, it's unicorns, it's magic, it's hard work, it's genius. It's all of these things, and it seems very grand and very big. And then you move into the consulting world, and it's the same. It's very hand wavy. And so there's something good about the book Traction, which is just like running a business is this and this and this, and it's no frills.
Interesting. So who's the author?
Wickman. What's his name? Gino Wickman.
All right. Cool. That's a thick book.
It's very big time.
You're going through it the second time. Well, you're a passionate dude. Favorite holiday spot?
I did a road trip about 3 months before COVID hit over in the States, and I did Yosemite National Park, I did the Grand Canyon, and I did the Zion National Park. And that was very good. I would recommend those spots.
Interesting. Did you do it in a caravan?
No, I did like a little road trip and camped at Yosemite, which was quite cold, and just stayed at like accommodation at the others.
Very interesting. A thought leader you follow?
Oh, I've already kind of covered that, but I follow Scott Galloway.
Okay, you're a fan, huh? You're a fanboy.
Would certainly be a fanboy of him. If I had to pick someone else, been listening to him less over the last month, but Ezra Klein is like a political reporter over in the States. But I think over time has started to like branch out into other topics, and has this whole riff. He kind of talks about like his whole riff is a little bit about psychology. He talks about like polarization in the States and how, actually how people stick within groups, and that kind of like identity of a group can be so strong, and actually that probably informs politics so much more than anything else.
Very nice. So that leads back to your initial experience with behavioral psychology and all of that. So I think that's probably the interest is coming from there in this whole thing.
Certainly, yeah. He's got. I'll tell you a quick story that just stuck with me from one of Ezra Klein's podcasts, where he told this. It was this research experiment. They took a bunch of teenagers to a camp in the States, just like one of their summer camp things. And they gave half of them blue shirts and half of them green shirts. And they didn't reference it at all, right? They didn't mention that there are different groups. They didn't mention here is blue or here is green. It was just like there were just two different kinds of shirts. And then they just saw what happened. And you get to lunchtime, none of these kids knew each other. The blue shirt people stick together, the green shirt people stick together. When they were picking teams for sports, it was the blue people together, the green people together. And it's just like humans are so susceptible to being put into groups or finding that connection in like the smallest, most random ways possible. It's a nice check about when you've got an opinion on something. It's like, do I have this opinion because it's
So
true, or is it just me picking the side that I'm on?
That makes my mind go into so many places. Now I'm thinking, how the heck are we ever going to fight racism if that's so much embedded in our brain?
It's the smallest.
You can't deny that.
There was another version of it where on the first Planet of the Apes movies, they mocked all the extras up, some as monkeys, some as apes, some as humans, and they sat in species. Like these people who had never met each other. You're like, no, we're just going to hang out. It's a bit weird.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. Look, being a marketer, obviously, I'm passionate about it, and it's kind of my job to stay up to date and informed about behavioral science and knowledge. Do you recommend a knowledge source for me, a person who is not deeply academically into it? Is there anything you could point me towards for behavioral studies?
Yeah, and look, don't let me oversell myself. I'm very much an amateur in this space, very passionate enthusiast more than anything else. Let me Google it. There's behavioral design cards. This probably makes for boring podcasting. But there is this really great resource that, if I can remember the name of it, is good. And basically what they do is they summarize very complex behavioral design topics into very actionable, usually marketing or product-led insights. And so it kind of bridges the gap between something that's very complicated into something that can also be quite actionable.
Interesting.
What is that called again? As you can see, I'm horrible with names.
What you can do is you can find that out and send me in a text or something, and I will link to that to the show notes, because I think even the audience will find that pretty useful from what you're telling me.
Yeah, they certainly will. It's very actionable. It's a little on the pricey side, so like there's like maybe 20 free ones that you get a bit out of, and then I think it gets expensive real quick. But it's a great resource.
Okay, cool. Favorite marketing channel? Well, I don't know if you're there. Normally I ask that to the marketers themselves, but like, what's a good social media or digital platform that you personally have good experience with?
Yeah, I certainly feel like other people will have more nuanced answers to this. I think most of my success when it comes to marketing is generally like thought leadership or content. So I don't mind myself a Medium article or a webinar would be my...
So good. Medium. I mean, I haven't had that answer from anyone so far, so I think you did a better job than most marketers there, man.
it's niche, but there's a passionate community there for sure.
Certainly, and even from an SEO perspective, that thing's really good. Because you write about if you're getting into more sort of a question sort of search term, and if that is on Medium, the Medium and Reddit and Quora, these things that pop up on top. So I think that's a very smart move to have a presence over there. What is an unpopular opinion that you have?
Ooh. Being a consultant myself, I have a pretty negative opinion
About consultants?
of consulting and consultants. Which I guess in particular circles would be controversial. The other probably controversial opinion, but it's one that's also probably pretty niche, is, do you like Agile as a way of working?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I tend to feel like it's either overused at best or kind of creates more chaos at best.
So true. And I say agile when you basically don't have any project management methodology, you use agile. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a way of saying we don't know what we're doing, we're just figuring it out. So people call it a methodology. It's not.
No,
it's just improvisation.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like it works in like particular areas, right? Like it's successful for a reason, but it gets incredibly overused and used badly, and often it gets used as a way for leadership to just make people work longer and harder, because you're like, oh, can't we be agile? Couldn't we be agile on the weekend?
But it's kind of, isn't it essential when at a startup level, at a Series A or a seed level? I think you kind of have to be agile.
You've certainly got to be agile. Like you've got to be able to adapt. No, let me take that back. You need to be agile as the generic word agile. Like you need to be dynamic. You need to be able to move. You don't have to necessarily have stand-ups in the morning and 3-hour planning sessions.
Not agile as a system, agile as a mindset.
As a mindset, yeah. I think you've got to have like a growth mindset would be how I'd put it.
Absolutely. Most important or most valuable lesson that you've learned through your career so far?
A big believer in the like 80-20 rule, or not letting not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, is simple but very good advice for me as someone who tends to be a perfectionist. I can often lose my way, because I'm like, this button is just not quite the right shape, or maybe it's not the right color. And getting that advice to be like the 80-20 rule, if people don't know what it is that 20% of the stuff that you do will give you 80% of the results. And so just constantly asking yourself,
that's Peter Thiel, isn't it?
That's certainly like a promoter of it. I think it might have come from like a research project, like a research, like an academic journal. But yeah, Peter Thiel is certainly an advocate, or very, yeah.
What role did a mentor play in your life, and who was it?
Oh yeah, so I have. He wasn't necessarily. He was a partner, like a business partner at the time. Like we were founding a business together, and I didn't necessarily think of him as a mentor. I thought of him as someone who was a bit of a pain in the ass and was.
Mentors tend to get like that.
He was being incredibly pedantic about things that I felt like didn't matter at all, and so. We're still good. We're still good mates now. His name, if you look him up, his name's Tim Stroth. He's got a very good book that I'd recommend called The Greater Truth. But his whole he's kind of built this idea that you need to sort out your strategy first, and has a very particular idea about what strategy is, and then. Once you've got that strategy set up, he has an approach that's very methodical and not like startup, agile, let's throw everything in the world culture at all. It was very, very different from that. It felt very old school and very foreign. But I come back to his advice and his thoughts on things all the time when I'm burning out or moving too fast or doing something. It's like, no, calm down. What's the strategy here?
That's so good, man. I mean, I think that's the biggest trap as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, right? Like there's no set criteria to do anything. You're always flowing in different directions, and just to have someone who tells you, hey, sit down, focus. This is what we need to do. Let's just do this. Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, cool. So I'm at the end of my questions. Anything that you would like to plug at this point? Something that you would like people, an action that you would like people to take, something you would like the world to know about, your business, a project, something else you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the opportunity again to plug impactpositive.co. So .co, not .com. As I said before, it's free for the moment. All I ask is for candid feedback about what would make it better. So yeah, that's my very simple pitch for people.
Excellent. I mean, it doesn't get better than this. I mean, free product, free tool. I mean, why would you say no to that? Excellent. Thank you, Ben. This was certainly one of the most light and free-flowing conversation I had. Really had a good time. Thank you for joining us, man.
Appreciate it. You're a very easy guy to talk to.
Cheers, mate.